Shalom and welcome to the 119 Ministries podcast. I'm John Sherman and this is David Wilbur.
Hey everyone.
We're part of the teaching and research team here at 119 Ministries.
That's right. And this podcast is our chance to connect with other teachers and ministry leaders to discuss the scriptures and what God is doing around the world.
So please be sure to like and subscribe to the 119 YouTube channel. We release new content every week. Also, connect with us online at testeverything.net and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we hope that you're blessed by this discussion.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're so excited that you joined us today, and we are excited to welcome our friend Mark Jacob on the show today. Mark is a very good personal friend of mine. I've known him for many years, and we recently brought him on the 119 Ministries team as our resident Hebrew teacher. So we are excited to have him on and excited to hear from him and to talk to him about this new resource that we're going to be offering. So, Mark, it's great to have you on. Go ahead and say hi to everyone.
Hey, Dave. Hello, John. Hi, everybody online. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome, man. Great to see you. And why don't you, John, go ahead and kick it off with our first question for Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Shalom, Mark. So you're a believer in Yeshua, have faith in Yeshua, and you also keep the Torah. You've been doing this for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? I think the audience would like to hear a little bit about that. How did you become a believer? How did you become interested in things like the Sabbath and the biblical festivals, the feasts? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my family was always Christian. And from the time I was very young, my parents started looking at things like the Sabbath and examining whether we should keep that or not. And they attended several different groups that were leaning that direction. For me, being a believer, when I was 12, I had an actual experience that convinced me that God was real. I had decided at the time that if I was going to be a Christian, I might as well really be a Christian and actually commit my life to God. And so, long story short, I was praying one night saying, all right, well, I want to commit my life to you. And then I got this horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I'd been rejected. And so I prayed and said, okay, what's going on? Why is this happening? And I became very convicted that I needed to make amends with my family. The verse came very clearly into my mind from in Matthew, where it says, if you're bringing your gift to the altar and you have something against your brother, leave your gift there at the altar, go to your brother and make it right, and then come back and offer your sacrifice. So I went and did that. Woke up my parents and my brother and sister and talked to them and, basically said, hey, I'm sorry for being the disrespectful, rebellious son. So kind of cleared the air about that, and then went back and prayed again. And this time, the only way I can describe what happened is overwhelming joy. It was a spiritual experience. I haven't felt anything like it before or since, but I knew that it meant that my prayer had been accepted then, and I also knew that God was very real then, because that wasn't something of my own making. So that's kind of the basis of why I believe anything, was that experience. Among others, I've had others, other things happen too, but nothing like that.
That's awesome.
So where my doctrinal beliefs come into the picture, like I say, my parents had already started going down the route of keeping the Torah. But, as I got a little older, I didn't just want to take people's word for what I should believe. And of course, since my parents' beliefs were a little bit unorthodox, I was very familiar with the idea that people have lots of different opinions about who God is and how to interpret the Bible and what we should do with our lives.
Right.
And so I started studying for myself, and sort of my baseline was, well, I know that what Jesus said is right. That was after all the verse that I was heavily convicted of when, this whole experience happened, which was a quote from Jesus, from Yeshua. And so that was my baseline as well. All right, he's kind of my base, and whatever he says is right. And I had an open mind about, I wasn't locked into any particular sort of orthodox doctrine. Nothing that said, well, the Old Testament doesn't matter, or nothing that said that, you have to agree with Jewish interpretation of things or anything like that. It was just kind of wide open. So I started looking at things, and the long and short of it is, when you look at Yeshua's teachings, there's no way I shouldn't say there's no way to make sense of them without looking at the Torah, but when you know things from the Torah, his teachings make a lot more sense.
Starts unlocking things.
Yeah. It really shows the context of what he's talking about. You realize that he's not just speaking in a vacuum, but he's addressing issues that the Jews were addressing, had been addressing for thousands of years, and were addressing right at that time. And so, so the more you look at that, and the more you look at the, history of Judaism and, what's going on in the first century, it further clarifies so many things that Yeshua was talking about. And some of the things he talks about are pretty well universally understood. Loving your neighbor as yourself is not a concept that you need a lot of background to really understand. Just being a human being, you can kind of understand what that means. But other things, like when he talks about divorce, or when he talks about the Sabbath, or, these ideas that we don't necessarily intrinsically understand, but they have a context inside of the Torah. When you understand the Torah, those things make a lot more sense. And also when you understand how the Torah works and how interpretations of it work, you understand that Yeshua never said not to keep the Torah. On the contrary, he was always telling people to keep the Torah, and not just that, but how to keep the Torah,
right? And
how to interpret the things that they read in the Torah and in the prophets. And so, the whole, everything kind of fits into this this whole picture where Yeshua he is presenting something radically new in a sense, but he's building on things that already exist in order to do that. And so, so kind of where I stand now, after looking at this for a while, is that, the Torah is applicable to believers, and that Christians are really part of Judaism in a sense, that it's not a separate religion, and it was never intended to be. That everything Yeshua was teaching was just the next step in Jewish development, and the next step in, not really the next step, but the first step, the step that God intended for his people to be taking all along.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So when the moment that you made that prayer and you reconciled things with your family, and the moment that you kind of started saying, hey, we should be following the whole Torah, you said your parents are kind of exploring that already, but did you immediately start following the Torah, or was this more of a process? And if so, how long did that kind of take for you?
So to fill in some of the details there was a fairly large church that was called the Worldwide Church of God. And they were around a very long time ago. I don't remember exactly when they started, but it was, I think, the 1950s that they started, or somewhere many decades ago.
Right.
Anyway, they wouldn't have used the term Torah, but they taught that, the Sabbath was on the seventh day of the week, that you shouldn't eat, pork and shellfish, that we should keep the festivals that are listed in Leviticus. So they taught those things. And and so basically that the law was not done away with was kind of their
Right.
their take. Now, the way they went about it kind of created its own, little system, which wasn't 100% based on, biblical standards. But regardless, they kind of, lean the direction of, hey, we should keep things in the Old Testament, not ignore all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so my parents joined that when I was about 5, I think. And we went there for a few years. Worldwide Church of God, as far as I know, doesn't exist anymore. It split up into like a million different pieces in the mid-90s.
Right.
But anyway, after that, we kind of met with a number of small groups and that were more open to things like, hey, let's look at Jewish commentaries about, these subjects and see if they have any insight as to, how we should keep the Torah. Let's call it the Torah, instead of let's not be afraid of using Hebrew terms and so yeah, when I was 12, I was already in the middle of that whole environment. And so it was very natural for me to stay in that. But once I started looking at things for myself, it wasn't a given that I was going to stay in
Mm-hmm.
that. I very much wanted to know what the right thing to do was, regardless of what my family was doing, because, what my family was doing was in opposition to what their families were doing. So, who's to say which one of those groups was right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to be convinced for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I already had a base that assumed a number of the things that I believe now. But I went through with a critical eye, testing a number of those things. And, the most logical conclusion I could come to based on Yeshua's teachings is that, well, yeah, the right thing to do is to keep the commandments that God gave to his people.
Awesome.
That's awesome, man. So you tested everything and you held fast to what is good.
I like that.
So, yeah. It sounds like it could be a cool ministry tagline.
Right.
Might be. Yeah, maybe you could get that domain name or something.
Right.
Well, that's really cool, Mark. So basically, you've been doing this stuff your whole life. It was because of your parents kind of investigating this. So you've been in that environment that was welcome to these ideas in the Old Testament, and then you came to a place where it seems like you really wanted to test these things for yourself, and it seems like just from your personal biblical study of Yeshua's sayings, Yeshua's teachings, that you've come to the conclusion that these things are relevant to us. And I think that's really neat. You kind of have a perspective. You have a long time perspective of this thing, being able to grow up in an environment that kind of welcomes studying these things out and creating that environment to really be able to explore these things. A lot of us just don't have that experience. A lot of us grew up part of well-established Christian traditions, and we came into this. Yeah, like me too. I grew up,
Right.
John raised his hand for those who didn't see, but yeah, I grew up Lutheran and then Baptist. I started attending a Baptist church in high school. And so it was kind of a little bit more closed off to embracing the Old Testament and these, commandments and God's law and seeing the value in them. And so it's neat to kind of hear from your perspective, being able to grow up and having that freedom to test these things. And also, being able, coming to these conclusions yourself, not being influenced one way or another, that it just came from your study of the word. So I wanted to ask you about Hebrew, your expertise, what you're bringing to the table here at 119 Ministries, which we're so excited about. But how did you get into studying the Hebrew language and all of that?
Well, so when I was a kid, my dad had a friend who was Jewish, and I don't remember exactly when this was, but there was one time we had him over for dinner, and he was talking to us about something, and and the Hebrew language came up, and he sat down and taught us the whole Hebrew alphabet, like our whole family, just spontaneously. And so sometime after that, I guess I was probably in my mid-teens, my dad and I actually took some Hebrew tutoring from him. We'd meet with him like once a week, and he would start to teach us the language. So we did that for a few months. He eventually ended up moving to Israel, so I haven't seen him in a long time. But yeah, that's kind of how it started. Is we had a Jewish friend, and he taught us Hebrew. And of course, as I started studying things for myself, you start to, as a kid, when I'm looking at this, I think, well, why don't we just do what the Bible says? Like, that seems pretty straightforward, right? There's all these different beliefs, but why don't we just do why don't we just believe what the Bible says?
An epiphany.
Yeah. And, but that's a very simple and straightforward thought. But then you start looking at Bibles and realize there's not just one Bible, that there's all these different translations. And so, you follow that trail down a bit, and you realize, oh, there's different translations because the Bible wasn't written in English. It was written in several different languages and then translated eventually into English. And so
so that kind of speaks to the value of why we should study Hebrew then, because when we realize that the first half of the Bible is written in a certain language, how much easier is it for us to understand it and apply it and live out the faith if we can kind of understand the nuances of different ways of actually looking at the text itself. And I think that's great. What would be some of the other reasons that would be that you would consider to be valuable in the studying of the Torah or the Hebrew language?
Yeah. Well, that's definitely the first reason is cutting out the middleman of the translator,
right?
And going right back to the text itself to come up with an interpretation. And so that was my initial drive to learn the language. Was, well, I want to figure out what the text really says. So I want to learn the language that it's written in. As you start to learn the language, you realize that there are actually like you say, there's other benefits to learning it. Because even when you learn the original text, things still are not necessarily cut and dried. It's not like Jews who spoke Hebrew didn't disagree about the text and haven't for thousands of years, right? There's always different interpretations, always different ways to approach these various things.
Yeah, they spoke the language.
Right.
Yeah, they spoke it natively.
Right.
And so another benefit to me about learning the language is that it kind of illustrates, it points you to other kinds of resources that help you understand the text. So in addition to knowing the Hebrew language, you start to realize things like, well, you're reading a text that's 3,000, 4,000 years old, and it uses a word somewhere, and we don't know what that word means because the meaning of that word has been lost. It's used like one time in the entire Bible, right here, this one Hebrew word, and we don't know exactly what it means. So how are you going to figure out what that word means? You can't just rely on knowing Hebrew because modern Hebrew isn't informing you as to the meaning of that. And they didn't have, you can't find a 3,000-year-old dictionary. And so what are you going to do? And so then you realize,
ask Alexa or Siri. Right?
Right. There you go.
They know everything.
Yeah, Rabbi Google.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll have an opinion for you.
Right.
But you realize the value after that, though, of things like archaeology. You say, okay, if we can find out more about the lifestyle that these people were living when this word was written, then maybe that'll give us a clue as to what this word means. You can look at they're few and far between, but contemporary texts, in similar languages. Hebrew is one of a family of languages called the Semitic languages, and another common one of the time was Phoenician, and we do have texts that are written in Phoenician. There's others as well. And there are some surviving texts that are not as old as the Torah, but, are old. The difference between 2,000 and 3,000 years is pretty vast, but it's better than, the difference between 100 and 3,000 years. So, but anyway, if you can find those old texts and you find a word that's similar to the word that you're trying to interpret, and you can maybe get a better idea of what the word means in this extra biblical text, then maybe that'll give you a clue as to what the word means in the biblical text.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it just points to these other sort of scholarly resources that you can also use to try to help you understand what the text means. And to be clear, usually when there's not a lot of clarity in the text, it's not necessarily a place that's highly doctrinally significant. Mm-hmm. Usually this is to kind of fill in the details of things, but not always. There are very doctrinally significant verses that have a word that's kind of mysterious, like the Shema actually has a word in it that's the word for that's translated might is usually a word that's translated very. It doesn't even work as a noun usually. So understanding what that means, it takes a lot of effort and research. But when I say doctrinally, that doesn't detract from what the Shema means. Just because you don't know the exact minutia of this one word, it still means dedicate everything you have, to God, love him with everything you have, regardless of the...
Right.
I think like a literal translation for that word, like it'd be like very veriness, like with all of your muchness, all of your
much mucho.
Right. Yeah. So there are some real questions though, and you might, if you could dig up the details of exactly what that word means, it might lend a little bit of insight into maybe some way to apply the Shema a little bit better. But yeah, so that is, so like I say, benefits of Hebrew, number one is reading the text in its original language. Like that's an advantage. Number two is pointing you to other resources in addition to the language when you realize the shortcomings of just knowing the language. The third thing that I would say is valuable about learning Hebrew is it also helps to insulate you from some bad doctrines. Now there's plenty of bad doctrines to go around, and there's all kinds of bases for those doctrines. But one very easy way to base something on a bad doctrine is to say, well, in the original Hebrew it says this. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's easy to base a bad doctrine on that is because most people don't know Hebrew, and so most people can't dispute your claim with any education. They can just say, well, no, it doesn't mean that, but they don't know why. And but if you do know why, if you do know the language, then when someone does that, you can have a rebuttal. Just as an example of that, this was many years ago, but there was a show. It was on TV, and it was like a documentary about the Exodus. And so they had these various scholars on there that were talking about it. And I remember one of them saying, well, if you look in the Hebrew, it never says, I don't remember exactly what he said. It never says something like it never says the Israelites were slaves. And he can claim that because nobody who's watching knows Hebrew, but I knew Hebrew when he said that. And I'm like, I can point you chapter and verse to the place that explicitly says they were slaves, and I can track through how that verse is used to mean slaves throughout the entire Tanakh, like it's it was a completely nonsensical thing, but he was using it to back up whatever theory he had about how the Exodus actually happened, because
it was written by aliens or something. Knowing the History Channel, that's probably.
Yeah, I don't think he was going that far out there, but
That's season 2.
Yeah, I think he was more of an atheist and just kind of thought, that nothing.
Trivializing the whole event.
Yeah, this is based on a somewhat historical event, but there was no divine intervention going on here.
They weren't slaves; they were free to leave anytime they wanted. It wasn't that big a deal. Yeah,
yeah, and they just made up the story about how glorious it was when they actually left and how they, But whatever the case, and like if you want to make that argument, you can make that argument on a scholarly level, but you can't say that the text says something that it doesn't say, or that it doesn't say something it explicitly does say repeatedly. So knowing Hebrew helps insulate you against things like that, and know when those kinds of claims are valid and when they're just completely out of left field.
That's awesome. Well, Mark, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your class that you're going to be offering, Learn Biblical Hebrew with 119 Ministries. And like we said at the beginning, we're just so excited to have you on board with us and to be able to offer this resource for free to those who are interested in everything that you're talking about, everything about learning the basics of the biblical language, the grammar points and the vowel pointings and all of that to discover how you can actually dig into this biblical language and be able to do the things that you're talking about, really get into the nuances of meaning and all of that. So the class that we're going to be doing, it'll be available on our website and on YouTube if you're interested, anyone watching. We're shooting for a late fall / early winter release. And we're just excited to be able to offer this for free to everyone. There's also going to be notes that we're going to develop that will be available for people that they can just follow along with. And Mark, I wanted to ask you, what can people expect and what can people not expect from this language class that you're offering?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So what the class is designed to do is take someone who doesn't know anything at all about Hebrew and get them to where they can read a Bible verse in Hebrew, and to do that in as short a time as possible. In order to do that, it's a very basic, very beginner class. We go through the alphabet and learning the letters and the sounds they make, going into some basic words, some basic sentences, and then we translate a fairly straightforward Bible verse using all those principles. To learn the language fully takes a lot of time and dedication, and probably money, to get a good teacher who can, you can directly ask questions to and that sort of thing. But this is just designed to set people up with the basic principles of the language, to get a basic understanding of how it works, so that can kind of be a solid base for them. If they ever do want to learn it in more detail, they can already know these principles, already know, a lot of the language basics, and then they can learn the finer details in a later course.
Awesome. Well, kind of talk us through a little bit about the course. Like if we were going to be watching it today, what's the structure look like? How are you going to accomplish what you just said you're going to do?
So it goes, I have fairly bite-sized lectures set up, just a few minutes long, basically, 10, 20, maybe 30 minutes at the most. And each one will take you through one or two basic concepts. It starts out just learning the alphabet, because Hebrew uses a different alphabet from English. So you got to learn what all those letters look like and what sounds they make. We just start out with that, and corresponding with that, each lesson will have notes and some exercises you can do to go along with that, to kind of be able to practice the material and really cement it into your mind. And then, I just take one or two little concepts, try to break them down as simply as I can, leave out all of the annoying exceptions. So you don't have to remember all that, just remember the concept, and we'll put it into use right away. So it's like I say, it's for people who, if you have no experience with the language at all, or just a little bit, this will get you up to the point where you can read a Hebrew sentence, or a simple Hebrew sentence, I should say, because
Very
obviously,
cool.
like any language, it gets more complicated. This is not for scholars. This is not for people who already know and want to deepen their understanding of the language. This is for rote beginners, or people who just dabble in it a little bit and just want to get a solid footing.
Awesome.
Yeah. I really, as you know, I've been going through your notes, Mark, as you've been writing out the scripts for the teachings and everything. And I've just been learning a lot myself, just reading through your scripts for the videos that we're going to be making. And so I'm excited, to see a lot of people, who are interested in watching these videos, how, they're going to be able to learn as the series goes on. And I like how each video kind of builds on the last one. So, people can just watch these short videos and then, it just progressively, they're learning more and more progressively, starting at the front part, and as they keep going. So I've learned a lot, so I'm excited for other people to dig in and to learn things too. Speaking of learning, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the challenges that many people face when studying a new language like Hebrew? How do you feel like this class will help people through those challenges?
Yeah, so one of the big things I want to do with this class is inspire some confidence in people that they can learn the language and all of its intricacies. And yeah, there are several challenges to learning any language. You have to learn a whole new vocabulary and a whole new set of a whole new way to think about how you speak and write. So learning any language faces those challenges. The unique challenge is with Hebrew as opposed to some other languages. Like if you've ever learned Spanish or German or French or anything like that, any of the Western languages that are in common use now, all of those languages come from Latin, which is the same thing that the same ancient language that English comes from. And so all of those languages share the same alphabet, the Latin alphabet, with small variations, but you can recognize the letters, and you just have to learn, okay, this letter is pronounced a little bit different. And so you can kind of jump right into actually reading things, even though you don't necessarily understand what they mean. Hebrew is a more Eastern language, so it's more akin to learning like Korean or Japanese, where you have these characters that are foreign looking. They don't correspond to any letter that you can think of. You don't know what sound it makes, so it just looks like scribbles, And so that can be kind of intimidating when you look at that at first, and it can look kind of complicated. And so, yeah, I definitely want to demystify that a little bit and, just show, nope, this is just like learning the English alphabet. There's nothing to be, hung up on about that. But that is a big psychological obstacle, is just looking at the letters and saying, this doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before. But that's once you overcome that hurdle, which I hope to do as comfortably as possible in this course, you can really make some good progress, learning how the language functions, and then the vocabulary kind of builds on itself, and yeah, it kind of snowballs from there. Another challenge about learning Hebrew is that you read it backwards. All the Western languages read from left to right. Hebrew's read from right to left. That's pretty simple to get in your brain, once you kind of have the hang of it, but that's just another oddity. And yeah, when you're first learning, those are really the only things that make it challenging as opposed to learning any other language. Not that I know a whole lot of languages, but I know a little bit of a number of other ones. And so, so yeah, those two things, just the unfamiliar appearance can really be intimidating. But yeah, if you have a good teacher and you're confident that you can do it, then you can work past that. And once you know the letters, you're not going to forget them. So yeah, those are the challenges for a beginner. And once you get into the more advanced stuff, there are other things that can be challenges, just because of how the language functions. But that gets into technicalities that you really don't have to worry about when you're first jumping into it. So, by the time you reach that point, you'll be comfortable enough with the language that you can wrap your head around those things. So
that's awesome, man. Well, thanks so much. One last question for you before we conclude. What is your favorite thing about the Hebrew language, and why are you so excited for people to learn this?
Oh boy, my favorite thing. One thing I do like about Hebrew, aside from the fact that, it's the language that the Tanakh was written in, And so it has kind of a special status in that way. Is in English, English has a vocabulary set of like hundreds of thousands of words. And most English-speaking people don't have a vocabulary that large, but if you want the words to use, they're out there. The set of words available in Hebrew is just a few thousand. It's really not that large at all. But Hebrew can still achieve roughly the same depth of meaning as English, just by the way the language functions. So you can take a word and you can kind of manipulate it according to the rules of Hebrew grammar and verb conjugation to add all these layers of meaning to it. So you can express a whole lot in Hebrew in just a few words. And so there's kind of an efficiency, or you might say a beauty in that kind of system. And also once you know once you know all the rules in Hebrew, then you know how to make all of the words in Hebrew. You don't have to memorize tens of thousands of words. You just have to memorize a few hundred rules. And then you have access to every word you would ever need. So it's kind of neat like that. It's it kind of speaks to a time where, there's not just paper in abundance everywhere, so you can just write a gigantic dictionary to hold all your words. So anyway, there's kind of an efficiency and just kind of an elegance to that system that I really like.
Wow, you're getting me all excited. We're getting this all launched out there. But hopefully everybody kind of hearing this has kind of whet their appetite a little bit, got people kind of understanding what we're trying to do here. And we're going to be offering this class for free. And Mark, we're just so thankful that you took the time today, I know out of your busy schedule, to talk with us at length about everything that this new course is going to entail. It's going to be available for those listening on our website. It's going to be on our YouTube channel. Timing, we're still trying to figure this out, but it's really kind of looking at like fall, winter of 2020. So kind of keep an eye out for it. We'll be sending out more communications as we learn more and kind of get through the actual recording and editing processes. We want to just thank everybody for actually tuning in and listening to us today. We're very thankful for the whole community kind of connecting with us in that way. If you'd like to connect with us further, you can do that in several different ways. There's testeverything.net, which is the 119 Ministries website. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, Instagram, the social media channels that most people are familiar with. We would encourage everyone, if you're familiar with YouTube and you use YouTube, subscribe to us. Just click that little notification bell if you're watching it on YouTube especially. And you'll be notified every time that we release a new podcast. So, David, thank you for joining us. Mark, thanks for joining us. And we just pray that everyone watching this has been blessed. Shalom.
Shalom.